There's a version of you that already exists beneath everything you've been carrying. Not a future self you need to build, not an aspirational idea you need to manifest. A real, fully formed person who has been buried under layers of conditioning, performance, and survival strategies that stopped serving you years ago. Carl Jung spent his life studying how people uncover this version of themselves, and what he found was counterintuitive. The path to becoming who you really are isn't about adding anything. It's about giving things up, specific things. Things you've been clinging to because they feel like safety, like identity, like love. But they're not. They're the very things keeping the real you locked underground. Jung called this process individuation, the slow, often painful shedding of everything that isn't authentically yours until what remains is who you were always meant to be. And he identified a pattern so consistent across his patients that it became one of the foundations of his entire psychology. The people who completed this process always gave up the same 5 things, in roughly the same order, and every single one felt like a loss before it revealed itself as liberation. This is the one that breaks most people before they even start, because empaths, deep feelers, people who live with intensity, they don't just want to be understood, they need it like oxygen. They explain themselves endlessly. They craft careful arguments for why they feel what they feel. They rewrite text messages 4 times, trying to make their perspective clear. They leave conversations replaying what they should have said differently, so the other person would finally get it. Jung observed that this need isn't really about communication, it's about validation. The person doesn't need the other to understand them. They need the other to confirm that their reality is real, that their pain is legitimate, that their perception of events is accurate. And as long as they need that confirmation from outside, they will never trust themselves. Giving up the need to be understood doesn't mean you stop communicating. It means you stop requiring comprehension as proof that you're sane. You say your piece once, clearly, without performance. And if the other person doesn't get it, you let that be their limitation rather than your failure. Jung found that patients who released this need experienced an almost immediate surge in personal power, because the energy they'd been spending on making themselves understood was suddenly available for something far more important: understanding themselves. This is the grief that lives under all other grief. Not the pain of what happened, but the relentless fantasy of what should have happened instead. The parent who should have protected you, the partner who should have chosen you, the friend who should have stayed, the version of your life that would have existed if people had been who you needed them to be. Jung recognized that this fantasy is one of the most seductive traps in the human psyche, because it feels like love, it feels like loyalty. It feels like refusing to give up on people, but it's none of those things. It's a refusal to accept reality. And as long as you're arguing with what happened, you're not living in the present. You're living in a parallel universe that never existed and never will. Giving up this hope is the deepest grief an individual can face, because it means accepting that some damage was permanent, that some people were never going to be safe, that some chapters of your story were written by people who didn't care about the ending. But Jung found that this acceptance, once it settles into the body and not just the mind, creates a foundation of psychological solidity that nothing else can. You stop building your life on what should have been and start building it on what actually is. And what actually is turns out to be enough. Every overgiver, every empath, every person who identifies as the responsible one has a role in a system that depends on their dysfunction. They're the mediator in a family that refuses to communicate directly. They're the emotional regulator in a relationship with someone who won't manage their own feelings. They're the crisis absorber in a friend group that lurches from one emergency to the next. Jung called these roles the scaffolding of the false self. They feel essential because people depend on them. They feel meaningful because they create a sense of purpose. But they're parasitic. They feed on your energy to sustain systems that should have collapsed under their own dysfunction years ago. Giving up your role means letting those systems collapse. It means watching your family flounder without your mediation and not rushing in to save them. It means letting your partner sit with their own emotional chaos and not organizing it for them. It means saying, "I'm not available for this anymore," and tolerating the guilt that follows. Jung observed that this is the point where most people turn back, because the guilt is overwhelming. The system fights to keep you in your role. People who benefited from your dysfunction call you selfish, cold, changed for the worse. But Jung would tell you that if your absence causes a system to fall apart, the system was never healthy. It was dependent. And your continued participation wasn't love. It was life support for something that needed to die. This is the person you've been performing for years. The version that says the right things, maintains the right appearance, achieves the right milestones. The version your parents would approve of, your culture would validate, your social circle would admire. Jung called this the persona, and he considered it the single biggest obstacle to psychological wholeness. Because the persona isn't just a mask you wear in public. Over time, it fuses with your identity. You forget where the performance ends and the real person begins. You chase goals that aren't yours. You maintain relationships that look good but feel empty. You build a life that everyone envies and you secretly resent. Giving up the persona means tolerating the terrifying question of who am I without the performance, and sitting with the silence long enough for an honest answer to emerge. Jung found that this silence is where the real self lives, not in achievement, not in approval, not in the carefully curated image, in the silence beneath all of it. This is the trap that keeps the most self-aware people frozen. They've done the therapy. They've read the books. They've identified their patterns, named their wounds, traced their trauma to its origins, and they're still waiting. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting to feel whole. Waiting for the day when the work is finally done and they can start their real life. Jung would tell you that day never comes. Not because you're broken beyond repair, but because healing isn't a destination. It's a way of moving through the world. You don't finish healing and then start living. You heal by living. By making choices that honor who you're becoming, rather than who you were. By entering relationships with your eyes open instead of waiting until you're incapable of being hurt. By building the life you want with imperfect tools, because those are the only tools anyone ever has. The people who wait for completion before they begin are the people who never begin. Jung saw this in his practice over and over. The patient who understood everything about their psychology but changed nothing about their life. Who used insight as a substitute for action. Who turned self-awareness into another form of avoidance. You've been carrying these 5 things like they're keeping you alive. The need to be understood. The hope that the past could change. The role in everyone else's story, the image of who you should be. The belief that you're not ready yet. But they're not keeping you alive, they're keeping you from living. Jung would tell you that the person you're meant to become doesn't require more work. They require less weight. They're already here underneath everything you've been afraid to put down. The only question is whether you're willing to let go. Not of who you love, not of what you value, but of every lie you've been told about who you have to be in order to deserve a life that feels like yours. You don't need more time, you need less disguise. And the moment you stop performing, stop explaining, stop hoping, stop rescuing, stop waiting, is the moment you finally begin.